In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Moukalled de Zwijger livecast.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the 6th edition of Emerging Stories. Welcome to you all. Welcome to my 3 guests. You can join the conversation by either logging into Zoom, or you can go to the website dezwijger.nl, and then via chat you can speak to other viewers, and you can ask questions to the speakers. I would like to welcome my guests, 3 females today. In the studio, Dutch writer, author, journalist Minka Nijhuis. Very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
And via Zoom we have Diana Moukalled, who is a Lebanese TV journalist, a producer, a documentary producer, and women's activist as well. And last but not least, Tasneem Alsultan from Saudi Arabia. She is an investigative photographer, a storyteller, a traveler, and kind of an Instagram star. Welcome to you all. We will have an hour, and we're pretty much in the Middle East today. We'll start off with Minka. Well, you have a very long track record. You're a very well-known journalist and writer. I think your history as a correspondent or as a journalist started in Myanmar.
Yeah, in the early 90s. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
You call yourself. You call yourself a slow journalist, right? Or it's, well, maybe not a slow journalist, but you practice slow journalism.
Yeah, it sounds like a contradiction, I know. But I think I'm not the typical journalist who's very good in news reporting. I found my niche much more in getting stories that take a much longer time, where I often take a person or a family as the focus of a story, and I follow them for a long period of time. And from those minor chronicles, I zoom out to the larger story of a country or a situation to provide analysis and context and history. Yeah.
But you're a traveler, right? I mean, most of your stories or all of your stories are abroad, so we don't really want to speak about COVID-19, but I guess you are kind of trapped in the Netherlands now.
Yeah, I'm under house arrest again. Yes, it was kind of ironic.
What do you mean under house arrest again?
I had been working on a book that was a sort of a novel about the life of a female freelance war correspondent. So I had.
Is that the book you brought?
This is the book Gekkenwerk. I guess it translates as a fool's errand or something, which also meant that I was already more at home than I used to work on the book. And I was very much looking forward to the moment that the book was out, done, and I would pack my bags again. And then Corona hit. So that's why I was making the joke about house arrest. My house arrest was, of course, self-imposed initially, and now I'm sort of back in. Yeah. I mean, I had journeys planned to Iraq, to Afghanistan, and to Myanmar. Those are countries I've been following for a long time, but it has to wait. But luckily, I'm almost in daily contact with people there, so the connection is not gone. But like so many others of us, we are at home, or at least not traveling as.
Because you worked a lot in Myanmar. I mean, you're going back there. I mean, we hear very little there. Do you know what's going on at the moment? Are people also in a lockdown, or?
Yes, to some extent they are. For the time being, it seems that the corona is not playing out in such a disastrous way as was feared. That probably has also to do a little bit with the climate, but many things are not clear yet. But yes, I think Myanmar is a very clear example of what I'm trying to say with the kind of journalism I do. Rightfully so, the world attention was very much on the persecution of the Rohingya, who were driven into Bangladesh at about 700,000 of them in a very, very brutal way. And rightfully that captured the world's attention. But by doing so, it was forgotten that since independence of 1948, there has already been a civil war going on, and it's exactly the same army that is driving out the stateless Muslim minority Rohingya that is oppressing its own people to some extent, and moreover other ethnic minorities. So,
but you witnessed yourself, and I think you even know Aung San Suu Kyi.
I always joke you can say sushi if it's too difficult, but her name is Aung San Suu Kyi. Yes,
almost.
You can say sushi. That's pretty close. Yeah.
But because she, how do you look at her at the moment? Does she carry a responsibility for what happened?
Definitely. She is in a difficult position in her relationship with the army and doesn't have total control over the army at all. That's still under the Ministry of Defense, run by a military man, and so is the Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Border Affairs. Nevertheless, she has a moral responsibility as the most influential civilian political leader of the country, of course. And that means that she has the responsibility to be a leader of all inhabitants of Myanmar. And she is not speaking out against the violence and defending the Rohingya as much as she should.
Because
on the
a
other
lot
hand,
of people, but a lot of people wonder what happened, right? I mean, she even received a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, but I think with her, it's also an example of a narrative that is much too simplistic. I often say, previously she was the beauty, and now she is suddenly the beast. She was neither of the two, and it is still a fact that she did a lot for the country in very difficult times by staying under house arrest and defending values as human rights and democracy, and that was a genuine contribution. However, that doesn't mean that she is a good leader in the different times that are now happening, which were supposed to be a period of transition, but still with the army very much in power. And she is apparently willing to very pragmatically sacrifice a sort of working relationship with the military at the expense of human rights and democracy. And until now, she's not getting very far.
Let's go to the Middle East. I mean, you worked a lot in Iraq. And maybe you can talk a little bit about yours. Yeah. Who's this family?
Yes. This is the family of, I stayed with them in 2003 in their house in Baghdad to document their daily life after the fall of the regime of Saddam Hussein. And more or less at the time that George W. Declared the mission sort of accomplished and major combat operations were over, the members of this family warned me and said, this is by no means over yet. And I took those words in my ears and thought, I would like to follow what's happening to them. So I got permission to stay in their house, and initially I documented their life on a daily basis for the newspaper Trouw, and then it became a book. And I'm still following them up to today. Part of the family in the end had to flee during the Civil War and ended up in America. The husband.
So basically, you have been telling, and you actually still are telling, the story of Iraq through their eyes. Is that a right way to put it?
Yes, and not only through their eyes, also through the eyes of other people I have known. But I strongly believe that, especially in a period when there often becomes a certain fatigue because Baghdad or Iraq became, in the readership's mind, the equivalence of a place where bombs are constantly exploding. And I don't blame anyone here in the Netherlands or elsewhere that you don't relate or to the situation, or that you lose your interest. And I think by telling a story of a family, I mean, the house was always full of humor. For example, if bombs exploded and they couldn't go out, then they would take out some beautiful glasses that had the flute like the shape of a champagne glass and would pour apple juice in it, and we would toast and pretend it was champagne and make jokes. And people are often also very resourceful survivors, and there's a lot of beauty in their stories. And I think by telling those stories, at the same time not losing an eye for the complexity and the larger context, but that is something that people can relate to. I call it the art of telling a story. And I believe it's a way to keep countries into the public eye.
But you met them, that was by luck or randomly, or?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary moment that I met them. I was looking for a family that I could follow for a longer period of time. And what you need is a family that not only has stories to tell, but also can sort of reflect on its own situation. And I was attending the first theater play in Baghdad, and the theater was still destroyed, but nevertheless a group of young actors had decided to put a play together about the recent history. It was the first uncensored play, and it was completely surreal because people came to see it even though there was still shooting in the city and there were looters moving around, and they climbed over the pieces of the theater because the theater had also been hit by bombs. But they were so keen to see some art. And one of the couples that I met there was the husband and the wife in this family. And they were so vocal about what it meant to them to see the first uncensored theater play that I thought, this is a family I should try to move into. And they immediately said yes. When I asked them, I said, consider it, because I'm there. I'm constantly asking questions. I write everything down. I'm asking you for a big favor. But they said, no, we said yes, and it will stay yes. And so in the summer of 2003, I moved into them, and I kept doing that on and off until 2005, 2006. Then they fled partly to Amman, and now the daughter lives in Baltimore, and I'm still in touch. And I was supposed to visit her in Baltimore, but because of Corona.
And how are they today? Do you know?
Pardon?
How are they today?
The daughter in the family found a job with. Basically, she's responsible for making sure that refugees find their bearings in the States. So she works a lot with Syrians and Iraqis. And she's doing quite okay, even though now she's working mostly from home. She is so well equipped to face the confinement and the uncertainty, because when I spoke to her 2 weeks ago, she said that her young staff has a real difficulty handling the uncertainty of the situation and all the restrictions. And she said, do you remember how we were sitting in my home in Baghdad, and we wouldn't even have, air conditioning, and it was 50 degrees, and sometimes we didn't have water, and then a bomb would explode, and we wouldn't be able to communicate with our loved ones. I feel myself in a sort of 5-star quarantine. So that inner strength that she experienced in Baghdad is a very useful thing for her to have. So she's doing all right.
We're running out of time, Minka. There's a question from the audience, by the way. Why do you prefer slow journalism, and what's the advantage if you compare it to most journalism we see, which is quite fast? And what attracts you to it, and what makes it different?
Well, I'm not dismissing the value of news reporting. I think it's very necessary. but it's not enough to have people really be engaged with a faraway country that most people do not really know. And what attracts me to it is I studied psychology. I guess I'm interested in people and human behavior. And it's the perfect way to follow your curiosity and get to know people also in very extreme circumstances. It's never boring, and there's never a journey that I get home and think, gosh, I met people who I will never forget and who will be part of my life. So it's also personally a very a rewarding life.
Because you got to spend time, right? You got to spend time and spend real time with people.
Yeah, and I liked the position where you are sort of an outsider, but you get to know the story from inside. And that's a very interesting and position to be in.
I have one more question, but I also want to bring in Diana and Tasneem into the conversation, because, I mean, you worked a lot in Syria as well. Syria is the neighbor of where you are, Diana, Lebanon. You know, I mean, if we look, I think what Syria, but correct me if I'm wrong, what Syria and Iraq have in common is that maybe they both have dictatorial regimes or had dictatorial regimes, but very educated populations, secular societies before. But if we look how we perceive it as an audience and what we see, is journalism on the right path?
There are many very fine colleagues who do what they can, but I do believe that in general, the focus with Syria has been so much on IS and those people from the Netherlands or other Western countries that joined them, that it almost became a situation where civilians in Syria were forgotten. And the occasional times that we saw them in stories were either rebels with arms or wailing women in black abaya. And I think in that sense we have narrowed down our reporting far too much to the IS story. And it is forgotten that for the majority of the Syrians, if you ask them, they have far more serious problems than IS, and that's basically still the regime of Assad. And the statistics prove the people who say this right, because there is no question that the majority of the victims, even though other armed groups also commit very serious human rights abuses, the majority of the victims, they are the result of the regime of Assad and his likes.
Tasneem, Diana?
I totally agree that the problem in Syria now is that it's run by a dictatorship. And the IS problem was extremely exaggerated. I'm not saying it wasn't serious. Of course it was, but it was on the expense of the real cause of the Syrian problem, which is the dictatorship of the Syrian regime. And unfortunately, I like the term that was used about the slow story, because the Syrian people are being neglected. People do have a fatigue from our stories in this part of the world. You can relate to one victim, 2, 3, young children, a young child, a young woman, but you cannot relate to hundreds, to thousands, to millions. And unfortunately, people are tired of the stories that are coming out of the region. But the reality says that these stories are still happening and they are escalating. We still have thousands of people vanishing in prisons. We have people vanishing from bombing, from killing, from kidnapping, and of course from poverty. You have million people between Iraq and Syria and Jordan and Lebanon have been displaced or are refugees. So the stories of this region are really massive, and the people just shut down out of it. They don't want to listen that much. So it's as if you are competing which story can reach out to the world. The public needs to know, but the public, the international public opinion is tired of it. And also here, it's giving a more leverage to the regimes because they are exercising more and more policing system. If you're talking about Egypt, Syria, Iraq, the Gulf region, we're more having an escalation in policing states, unfortunately.
But is it, I mean, Minka is describing a little bit how it's being perceived and being seen and reported here in Western Europe, for example. Is it? Are you seeing something different in the Middle East?
Well, it's a mixture of things. You cannot just put it as radicals or seculars. The Syrian regime has the beautiful face of a secular leadership, but unfortunately, it's exercising more killing and dictatorship more than the Islamic radicals. The region here has different faces. Yes, radicalism is one of these faces. It's not all of it. We have military leaders, we have militarization and regimes growing either in Egypt or of course in Syria, and we have in Iran, but we have a diverse communities. These are the things that you don't see that much in the Western media. In the Western media, you are so much occupied by having radical groups, which is, I totally understand, but I think it was exaggerated to the extent it overshadowed other realities that we have in the region. And there's a lack of interest in seeing other stories than radical groups. So yes, there are many dynamics. I live in Beirut. We have Hezbollah, but we also celebrate LGBT community, not extremely freely. We do have our limitations, but it's not one-sided. And this is the problem sometimes with the stereotyping, with the way that it is covered by international media sometimes. And I like, again, the term of slow story because it gives you beyond what you see in the news. And this is, to me, what is journalism about. Of course, you need to know what's on a daily news bulletin. But at the same time, it's not only the news. It's like in a war. You cover the casualties. But what's happening behind the front lines? What's happening to the people who are paying the prices later on when everybody leaves and they still live under the hard life that they are going through? Like in Syria. Nobody is covering Syria anymore. I'm sorry, yes?
We're coming back to you in a second. I just want one question for, and then we go to Beirut. Your book is out. Are people going to the bookstore? Can you promote it?
Well, of course, it's all kind of experimental now in this era of Corona. But yes, I mean, it's available in the bookstores and it's not doing bad at all, given all the difficult circumstances. People can buy it at the local bookstore than online. That's much better than supporting Amazon or whatever. So it's making the rounds, and so far the responses have been very, very positive. So I'm actually quite pleased. I'm pleasantly surprised, I have to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gekke werk.
Yeah.
Are we getting an English edition?
Yeah, well, I mean, we first have a second launch later this fall in Dutch, and then hopefully, who knows? Yes. I mean,
thanks a lot, Minka.
Yeah.
Diana, nice to meet you. But we met already a bit. I believe you're in Beirut. You're speaking from Beirut, is that right?
Yes, I am in Beirut.
So I think we all remember that things were not going too well in Lebanon. That there were protests, people were out on the streets. It was really like people seemed really not to want to give up. I don't think, and now, then Corona came.
Well, Yes, Corona came and people haven't given up yet, and people are still going to the streets, not in massive numbers, small groups targeting certain sectors, whether military court arresting people or any bank that is blocking depositors from getting their money. So the protesting wave is still going on, not like it was before because of Corona, because now we have another lockdown for 4 days starting tomorrow.
Why?
So people, because we have an increased number of casualties. In one day we had like 73. That was the first time and since we started having the coronavirus. So, and you know that the health system in Lebanon is a weak system, so we cannot afford to have big casualties. So now we will go again through another 4 days of lockdown. But the massive protesting wave is still going on virtually or on the ground.
Could you refresh our memories a little bit? Why were there such a massive protest actually?
Well, we have a historical problem in Lebanon related to corruption, besides other political reasons. Against people in last October exploded in the streets against the political and economical corruption in Lebanon. And the protesters managed in the government resigned. But unfortunately, after that, we didn't reach a solution. The economical situation continued to go down and down. Now the lira has lost more than half of its value. So we have a real crisis. Now the Lebanese government is negotiating with International Monetary Fund to assist Lebanon or to give advices to Lebanon. Besides political problems, security problems, we have a huge financial economical issue. It's threatening that more than 35% of Lebanese people will go under poverty line. So this is a very serious thing. With Corona, it has more and more negative impact.
And how has the government been responding to the protests, and how are they responding today?
Well, we have a new government that is almost 2 months ago, that was established, formed 2 months ago. I'll give you an example. In the first days of these new government, they chose to burn the protesters' tent in downtown Beirut. It was a symbolic move. The protesters were not in the tents because of Corona. And the government said that it was for cleaning purposes, and that was not true. It was a sign. Since then, we have a huge, the narrative by the authority against protesters have escalated. We have seen many protesters have been arrested. Some of them have been tortured, and that was documented. So we do witness a more appetite for a policing state in Lebanon by the authorities, different parts of the authorities, because in Lebanon we don't have one authority like other countries. We have a sectarian power sharing in Lebanon. So we are not comfortable with how the authorities are responding towards the protests. We have a huge issue with banks. Banks have locked depositors' money. Any Lebanese now who have an account in the bank cannot access the money. And this is something huge that has affected most of Lebanese, especially small depositors. We're talking about people having from $1,000 to $2,000 in the bank cannot access it. So that was what created the continuity of the protests in the streets.
Can you also, Hezbollah, which is in many countries, they are listed as a terrorist group. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're still part of the power sharing in Lebanon.
Yes, Hezbollah.
But they also have been accused of bringing in COVID-19 because they are affiliated with Iran. Well,
I agree on most of the accusations, but I mean, the part of the COVID-19 It was poorly managed by the whole government, not only even the planes coming from Italy. I wouldn't say that this is the real issue. I mean, COVID-19, yes, we had a mismanagement by the government when the planes used to come from Iran, from pilgrims going there and coming back. But this is not the only problem we have with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has the upper hand in Lebanon since the end of the civil war in 1990, with the Syrian regime having and Iran sharing the Lebanese power. So since then, we have a growing presence of Hezbollah. Now Hezbollah is fully controlling the government and has a big presence in the parliament. They have the upper say within the Lebanese system. Yes, they have been elected, but this is not the only issue. Hezbollah is armed, and Hezbollah has a regional power. Lebanese people alone cannot face, even though, yes, Hezbollah has supporters within Lebanese community, but not all Lebanese are supporting Hezbollah, but they cannot disarm Hezbollah because he is the only armed group in Lebanon, and they are much stronger than the Lebanese state. So today, when you listen to Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, coming out and speaking, you feel that he is the real leader of the country and not President Michel Aoun, who is the actual president. So people look for what Nasrallah says. For instance, if Lebanon is going to negotiate with the IMF, we waited for Nasrallah to give the green light, not for the President Michel Aoun. So yes, Hezbollah
is that worrying you?
Of course. This is a major issue. This is a major problem that we're facing. Hezbollah is a stronger party than the government. Hezbollah is run by Iran. Hezbollah is not taking into consideration the Lebanese interests, although they say so. Hezbollah is everywhere. He's fighting in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, and he is supporting different parties. He has open borders for his arms and weapons and money, and that is on the expense of Lebanese interests.
But I also saw images of Hezbollah fighters driving ambulances, handing out food. What was that about?
They are volunteers. These are not fighters, because within the areas of his control, mainly in the suburb of Beirut and South Lebanon, Hezbollah created volunteers who would help in local hospitals in rescuing corona victims. The Minister of Health in Lebanon, he is a member of Hezbollah. So again, it's a very interrelated situation that we're going through.
At the same time, Lebanon is one of the countries who has taken an enormous amount of refugees.
True.
Refugees which partly should have been taken by Europe. What is happening with them?
We have, when it comes to population, we have the highest rate of refugees all over the world compared to number of population. We have 4 million Lebanese. We're hosting 1.5 million, almost Syrian refugees. Before the Syrian refugees, we have almost 500,000 Palestinian refugees, plus or minus.
So more than a fifth of the Lebanese population is a refugee.
Absolutely. Although that's a problem, a very serious problem with a country that is already struggling, at the same time, it is a political tool that has been hijacked by the political elite. Both the Aounists, they are the bloc, the right-wing Christian bloc that is sharing the power with Hezbollah, and the President Michel Aoun is the head of this bloc. Both of them, unfortunately, have launched a very aggressive, a very racist language and measures against Syrian refugees, blaming refugees for all the problems that Lebanon is facing. I'm not saying it's not a problem, it is, but it should be dealt as a refugee issue. Here in Lebanon, unfortunately, they have been segregated. In many municipalities, they have been not allowed to move on. So, and we have the money that is coming to assist the refugees. We have serious questions and serious information about the corruption, how this money is being spent. So we have Syrian refugees. Lebanon cannot afford them. But at the same time, Hezbollah is helping the aggressor who already sent those refugees out of Syria. Hezbollah is ally to Iran and the Syrian regime, who is the major responsible factor for having Syrians leaving their country, whether going to Lebanon or Turkey or other. So it's really, it's hard to describe the situation. The refugees should be looked as people who had to leave their homes and those who have no place to go back to. It's true that it's not only Lebanon's problem, and there should be international assistance to this, but not to be used by the corrupt elite, political elite in Lebanon.
One question before we're running in. You set up an online platform called Daraj.com, yes. I believe.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit what it's about? I looked at it. It looks, well, you tell us.
Well, I've been working in mainstream media in Lebanon and the Arab world for the past 26 years. With 2011, after 2011 and the Arab Spring, we had high hopes that we will have more open media, we will have more freedoms. Unfortunately, the counter-revolutions by both radical groups and authoritarian regimes has been very, very strong, mainly on media. We have lower ceilings than the ones we had before 2011. We have witnessed many media outlets closing. Many media outlets have been more and more under the control of the system in different countries. So out of this frustration, out of the frustration of where is the media today in the Arab world with this polarization that we're going through, we thought it's about time, me and a group of other journalists, to have an independent platform. And to create an independent platform, you have to have a bit of either, you have to have a business plan, or you need the back of some businessmen that don't exercise political pressure on you. Unfortunately, we're not lucky to have any business people who can, or advertisement people who would be part of this. So we went to the other option, is having international funding, but not from governments and not from any part that could exercise editorial pressure on us. In 2017, we created Daraj.com. Daraj means steps. We felt that we are in a hole and we wanted a way out. So we thought it's steps. It's Daraj.com. It's targeting Arab speakers. We do investigative journalism, opinion pieces, analysis, videos, and we try to cover the underreported stories in the mainstream media as much as we can. We're talking about women, refugees, marginalized groups in the Arab world, besides major political issues as well.
And people can go to this website everywhere in the Arab world?
Everywhere in the Arab world and in the world. Yes, it's Daraj.com. You can visit us. And we have a recently launched English page.
And have you been facing any repression from the authorities for the work that Daraj is doing?
We have two cases at court at the moment for doing investigative stories about corruption. But that is manageable. I have to say that despite all the difficulties we have, Beirut and Lebanon in general is still a relatively good place to work as a journalist. It's not ideal, but if I want to compare it to Syria, to Gulf, to Egypt, to other parts of the Arab world, we still have a functional background here that we can work as journalists. Again, we are exercising more and more pressure, and we can witness appetite for exercising control over media. But so far, we can work I wouldn't say freely, but we can work out of here.
I want to bring in Minka and Tasneem as well, but there's one question from the audience as well, which is that here in Europe, but elsewhere in the world, but I believe also in Lebanon and in the Middle East, there's quite an increase of domestic violence because of people being in a lockdown. Could you say anything about this?
Of course, as in any other part of the world, we do witness that in the month of the lockdown, 100% increase in reporting of cases related to domestic violence. And we had one very dramatic incident where a man killed his wife and 9 other people in a huge massacre that took place less than a month ago. So yes, my answer is this is one of the major problems that we're witnessing post-corona pandemic.
Is that the case in Saudi Arabia? Do you hear anything about this in Saudi Arabia, Tasneem?
They're very underreported, unfortunately, in Saudi. So I have personally no way of knowing unless it's published anywhere. But I'm sure that's the case. I mean, if it's happening everywhere, then it's going to happen in Saudi for sure.
Mm-hmm. Minka, and any questions for? It's incredible work what you're doing, Diane. I mean, such a complicated situation.
It is very complicated, but I have to say at the same time, it's very rich. I can't imagine myself living in somewhere else or doing something else besides journalism. It's a way of explaining life and events around you and making sense out of it. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. That's true. But I have to say, I love where I live. Although that I curse it 100 times a day, but this is part of it gives you a meaning of what you do and what you say. I don't know if you share this with me.
Yeah. Hey, I'm just curious with Daraj, because you're saying you don't have investors, you don't have advertisers, correct?
Yes, no, we don't. We have.
So how do you survive?
Yes, we are supported by 3 institutions: IMS, International Media Support, based in Copenhagen, and European Endowment for Democracy, EED, based in Brussels, and Open Society Foundations. So these are the major 3 donors that are contributing to Daraj. But again, this is temporarily. We have a plan in Daraj that between 3 to 5 years, we should be able to make money, and we're working on our business strategy to be able to live, because if you want to be independent, editorially independent, you have to be financially independent. So that's something that we're working on. It's true that we have been faced by a very difficult situation now with Corona, with all the pressure, with all money that is shrinking. It's becoming harder, but we're working on it, and we have some ways that we're developing.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Good luck. I mean, we'll really happy that it's in English as well, so we can all follow it if we're not from the Arab-speaking world. So it's daraj.com, and yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot for being my guest.
Thank you.
Which brings us, we remain in the region, so to speak. Tasneem Alsultan, photographer, investigative photographer. You're in Riyadh now?
I'm currently in Riyadh, yes.
Yeah.
I left my parents' hometown in the Eastern Province as soon as they put the curfew and lockdown, escaping the system, as they say. But I wasn't very well prepared that I would be in full lockdown anywhere in Saudi, so I couldn't leave and photograph anything.
Yeah, because what's the situation now? I think there's you have quite a high number of cases compared to other countries?
For 30 million people as a population, we have around 3,000 cases, so it's not too bad in comparison. We still have enough hospitals and healthcare, and it's free. It's available for everyone, even for workers, so they don't even have to have an ID carrying with them. So it's still good, but it spikes up because people still will not follow the rules, the regulations, and we're still not very well prepared. It's Ramadan, so we're usually kind of used to gathering, and this is the month for not just fasting from food, but like having so much gathering. So it's a bit difficult for them, for everyone emotionally. Also, like a lot of the domestic workers and workers have free food during this month. So they're everywhere on the streets, and the restaurants are giving and volunteering. And this year, this is very different for them. So I feel emotional because I can't photograph that. I can't address this problem that I know they must be having currently.
So you know, I mean, normally when the sun sets, people will gather and they will share food. That's not possible at the moment.
No, so we had a 1 month lockdown, fully lockdown. So you can't leave your home unless you're going to supermarkets, only in your neighborhood. And a few weeks ago, they removed the full lockdown to a curfew, which is at 5 p.m., which is an hour and a half before we break our fast. So you still have to go back to your home. There's checkpoints everywhere. And this is for our safety. But again, I went to a few stores to photograph, and I saw still long queues outside IKEA, for instance, and supermarkets. So people still want to go back to their daily lives. Yesterday, it was announced that we will have also a rise in our taxes. So Saudi Arabia, up until the last couple of years, we never knew anything about taxes. And now from 5%, we're going to have to pay 15%. So that's also a bit of a shocking, unfortunate news that we have to kind of emotionally and financially prepare ourselves. So it also means that a lot of middle-class families are now going to have, be kind of parts of the lower income families in the country.
Because I mean, obviously, Saudi Arabia is for many people is Mecca, is the Hajj. Well, is that?
Yeah, so that's been fully locked down, and they haven't removed it at all for anyone in the Mecca and Medina. Medina is the second city of the holy sites, so these two cities are fully closed. So even people who live in those towns have not been able to visit their families, and that's also because they've had a high spike in numbers in Mecca specifically, and I think it's because we have lots of pockets of workers that are living in tight spots, and it's one of the most, I would say, crowded cities in the country. We, especially in Ramadan, we usually have thousands, if not, hundreds of thousands a day coming to the mosque to break their fast during Ramadan. So this year is the first year that we know in history that there is no one for this long of a period of time.
Mm-hmm. Because I think you in Saudi Arabia has a lot of foreign workers, like construction workers, domestic people who do domestic work. What happened to they from Bangladesh, from different countries? What happened to them?
Yes. So, I mean, a lot of the numbers of the COVID, unfortunately, was happening there because they live in, like I said, very tight situations, as in space-wise, and that's didn't really help. So they have free healthcare in Saudi. If you go to any hospital right now, again, without your ID, even if you're an illegal worker, they will still take you in and take care of you. But I think with that happening, and also the 15% tax, and also 40% of your salary cuts, all of these announcements happening yesterday, it's made a lot of the workers kind of feel that, okay, why am I here? Should I actually move back to my home country? So a lot of things are happening in the last 2 days, other than the COVID also.
Because that applies to, those new rules apply to them as well?
Yes, to everyone.
Hey, and we all witnessed the free fall of the oil. Saudi Arabia being one of the largest oil producers in the world. Are those new rules connected?
I think so. I think the governments wanted to kind of win that battle of still having oil to sell, but at the same time, this means that tourism, which we were relying on, and other sectors, private sectors, are no longer making any money. So while we opened up tourism at the end of last year, no one can visit the country. So a lot of things are kind of trying to, I guess, reshuffle and reorganize to bring some sort of money back to the country. But I don't know how this will work out, to be honest, in the future.
Hey, and how about you? Because you're a photographer. I think you travel a lot.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I think this is the battle that I have within me. If I'm, I would say, an insider. So usually I don't need a press pass to photograph anywhere in the country, and I'm always kind of cheering for myself and all of the local photographers to say, we don't need anyone to parachute in. We can tell our own stories. And then in the last month, I've been trying to not only pitch and get amazing kind of projects to work on for the biggest major publications in the world. Usually I work with Western publications. I've not had any help from the media authorities in Saudi. And a lot of them are either hesitant because my work is usually published with Western media, that they don't sincerely or feel sincere, I guess, liking to, or they just feel that I'm not... I might not portray the country in the best manner, which is also a different kind of side. They're used to having outside foreign photographers kind of fly in, and the Saudi media authority will kind of give them the stories and offer them, why don't you photograph this story? Why don't you portray this in a better light? So this is my own kind of, right now, problem that I'm facing.
So... how do you deal with this? I heard you started I'm a photographer. I'm like doing interviews. I heard you doing something similar. What's that about?
You hear me? Yeah. I just took off my headphones. Sorry. I didn't hear what you just said.
No, I heard, I'm a photographer myself, and now I'm interviewing people, which is not if people would have told me 3 months ago, I would have been highly amused or surprised or shocked. I heard you doing something similar. Can you talk about this?
I don't want to know who started it first, but no, to be honest, about 2 months ago or 2.5 months ago, after I moved back to Riyadh, I didn't really have anything to do, and I felt very frustrated and emotionally, I would say, unstable and depressed. And I thought that was not an issue that I was facing alone. Many more of us out there felt that we were helpless, and we didn't, I'm a journalist, you've cut my wings off, just as a manner of speaking, but so I wanted to kind of say, well, this is my virtual hug. I'm with photographers, editors, publishers, and people who can kind of walk us through this very stressful time. And I wanted it to be with people who everyone wanted to listen to. So, the photo now is of Sultan Al-Qasimi, who's an amazing curator from UAE and a very strong advocate for artists. Yes, that's him. And also with emerging photographers that no one would have known of. So I want to kind of have it gender equal, and also equal representation across the world of not only famous names, but I want it to be kind of everyone. So I would have a kind of a good following or a healthy following of people who would say, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing this person in a specific country that we wouldn't have realized. And also, I've interviewed a clown, for instance, who is from England and works a lot with refugees. I met him in Lebanon 2 years ago, and he works in Greece and in Syria and in Iraq. And I kind of felt like I want to hear what advice you can give me as a journalist or a photographer, as a storyteller. And I find myself kind of gaining a lot of advice and lessons, I would say, in this 1 hour of my daily interviews.
So what was his advice?
To be honest, it's kind of to accept that this time is very difficult for all of us, and we're gauging around it in a very different manner. I'm different than my 13-year-old daughter, and I'm very different also than my 15-year-old daughter, and to just let and allow us to vent, and then kind of take a step back and reassess how my anger is either effective or not, and to play. I think not only in the Middle Eastern region, but everywhere in the world, as adults, we kind of we don't want to play it. It's a quality that only children have, and I think that's an issue that we need to kind of assess of like how playing is so beneficial and healthy for us.
So, and what channel you are using for these interviews?
I'm just using my free Instagram channel because I feel that it's kind of accessible for everyone. It's not really for one platform or kind of one age group or you don't have to be a photographer. You don't have to know about Zoom. So I want it to be as accessible as possible. And for me, Instagram has been working. And that way I can also gauge with anyone, from the other person. It can be a photographer, artist, or anyone.
So is this what you're going to do, or are you going back to photography?
Yeah, I've been doing that for the past 2 months. And then every day I would save the 1 hour and then summarize it to 15 minutes and then repost it again to kind of have it saved for anyone on my Instagram to kind of, learn and listen to their advice. And it's given me kind of also like a filmmaking technique that I never thought I would have. So it's good. I feel that I've been a good listener, something that I've been I find very difficult in the past.
So it sounds like a therapy as well, right?
Exactly. It's given me a reason to kind of wake up and do something.
Right. So, Minka, maybe both of you have something for Tasneem as well. Otherwise, I had one question, which is a lot of countries, like we were speaking about Lebanon before. A lot of countries have been blaming groups or minority groups for the virus or bringing the virus or spreading the viruses. What is that in Saudi Arabia as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to Lebanon. When it first happened, the first lockdown was in the Shia minority areas in Saudi, in the eastern province specifically. And that was 2 weeks before the rest of the country went on full lockdown. So it kind of gave people a reason to point fingers and say, oh, the Shia minority are bringing it from Iran. Of course, we need to kind of get rid of them, etc. And it kind of got out of control. But this is all on social media, so nothing other than that. Once the full country went on full lockdown, it kind of made everyone feel, oh, well, actually the numbers in the Shia minority area are much less now than, say, Riyadh or Mecca and the other cities. So it has nothing to do with in Kuwait, they started also attacking minorities and immigrants. So I feel like whatever minority human beings can kind of point fingers at, they can rage against and just feel upset. So I don't know if this is the first time. I don't think this is the first time for people to point fingers about the Shia minority, specifically in Saudi. But I guess also it's illegal to travel to Iran. So I would say old people traveling to Iran, they were doing this through Iraq and through other ways. It kind of brought back that discussion of like, oh, wait, they weren't allowed to do it. Then they brought the corona, then we can hate them now.
Well, what worries me also about scapegoating certain minorities as being responsible for spreading the virus is, in general, this whole language and narrative, as if we have in the follow-up to the war on terror, we now have the war on corona and it's an enemy and we are in the front lines of a new battle. And several local journalists have warned me over the past few weeks that they are under pressure to be with the authorities, and if they have critical questions.
Local journalists where?
In the countries where I work, like Iraq, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Burma, there have been recent arrests of if you're not with us in this battle, you're against us, and that it is being used also as a tool.
We heard that before, no? That expression.
Yeah, exactly, and that it is being used as a tool to restrict not only the freedom and the liberties and the rights of a population, but also of the media. And I think that is something that we should be very aware of. That this is a real danger, and there are times ahead where a lot of those countries will face, regardless of the extent of the health issue, huge economic problems with unrest, etc. So the press there is very much needed. That's just one comment I would like to add on all this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel that there is a huge rise or spike up in nationalism currently. I don't know about Lebanon, but in the Arab Gulf region, I would say there is definitely a big spike. And if you are not supportive and just saying I agree with everything and I consent to everything, then you must be an enemy, and you will have a lot of trolls or a lot of negative consequences in your life. But I think I'm hoping that this will only kind of make us stronger and realize the priorities that we need to have in our lives and as a community also.
I agree. We've been suffering from this before Corona, and with Corona it has increased. And unfortunately, with international leaders like Trump and Putin and others, those people cannot help it to go down. They will increase more and more these kinds of comments.
We have to leave it there, unfortunately. It's been a real pleasure to have you as my guest. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Tasneem. Thank you, Minka, for coming to the studio. Wish you very well in the work you're doing, and really appreciate your presence. This was another edition, the 6th edition of Emerging Stories. Obviously, next week, Wednesday, the 13th, I believe, or is it the 20th of May, we will be back. I'm losing my days, at 4 p.m. Amsterdam time. Very happy to have Geert Mak in the studio, very famous historian, writer, and very well known for his television series and his books on Europe. So next week we will have more of a Europe edition, because we will also be joined by Cecilia Ferrara, who is an Italian journalist who will speak not only about the situation in Italy, but also the relationship with Northern Europe that Italy has or not has, and not to mention the Netherlands in the last place. And we will have a surprise guest who will, a name will be announced shortly, who's from Hungary. Thank you again for being here today and to attend, and hope to see you next week. Bye for now.